webinar. So welcome everyone. This is Solar Oregon's How to Go Solar and Storage workshop. My name is Nicole Matisek and I'm a program manager with the nonprofit Solar Oregon. This is a reoccurring workshop that we've delivered to home and business owners across the state for over 15 years. Our mission is to arm you as a consumer with the information you need to make good and informed choices as you explore solar and or battery storage. Solar has changed significantly in the past decade, and as the market changes, we make changes to this website and our webinar as well. All right. So just a little bit about what we'll cover today. We'll go over how solar works. We'll look at all the components that go into a system, learn about a process called net metering, which allows you to get a credit for the energy that you export to the electrical grid, and then also see how solar can save you money on your bill. Next, we'll take a look at how solar contractors assess your home. We'll see common issues with potential sites that can increase the cost of solar installation or that can prevent you from being able to go solar altogether. We'll then take a tour through the exciting topic of energy storage, and then talk about how a battery can allow you to access your power when the grid goes down. And after that, we'll learn about the incentives available for solar and battery storage. We'll walk through several example budgets, and then we'll wrap up today's presentation by talking about contractor selection and the installation process. So once we go through this entire presentation, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session. And any questions that you have about battery storage or even related technologies are welcome. We'll go ahead and describe how the Q&A function works. So just a little bit about us, Solar Oregon. We're just a 501(c) nonprofit that has worked to encourage solar and storage adoption throughout Oregon for over 43 years. We've done this by providing impartial education to consumers like you about clean energy and solar. And then we also work to build a clean energy community and perform outreach and policy advocacy. We also host solarized campaigns and solar tours, zero energy showcases, and expert panel discussions on a range of topics related to solar. To check out any of our past webinars or presentations, you can find us on YouTube, and that's just a great educational resource to look past at our old workshops and learn more about solar. Solar Oregon is a member-based nonprofit, so thank you to all of our existing members. The support you give us helps us keep this education program going. If you're not a member, please consider joining today and helping promote the adoption of renewable energy in communities around the state. You can join online at solaroregon.org. Members receive special discounts to events like the Solar Winery Tour and Go Zero Tour, and we also greatly appreciate direct donations. And then we're going to add some links in the chat so that throughout this presentation, we'll refer back to those, but also so you have other educational resources that can help you in your solar journey. So I'll go ahead and throw those in the chat now. All right. So a little bit more about this workshop. It is a series that is supported by the the Energy Trust of Oregon. And the Energy Trust is an independent nonprofit that was established in 2002 that provides resources to help enable customers of the investor-owned utilities in our state to use energy efficiently and also to gain access to renewable energy. They offer key incentives for solar installation, and in 2022 were authorized by the legislator to offer incentives for battery storage as well. So thank you, Energy Trust. And then just some housekeeping before we get right into the meat of this presentation. Please use the Q&A to put all your questions for this webinar. Make sure that you utilize the Q&A button. It will be in the menu of buttons, which you'll see one labeled Q&A. The chat will just be for posting links. So if you put a question in the chat, it might get missed. So make sure to use that Q&A box. And then finally, before we get started, we're going to launch a few polls that we just utilize to make sure that our education is reaching as much of Oregon as possible. So we'll go ahead and launch those. The first one is where you're coming from. So I'll just give some time for everybody to answer. Great. Great to see some folks coming from Eastern and Southern Oregon. Welcome, everyone. All right. And then I'll go ahead and launch the next poll. Okay. And thank you everyone for answering this. This is just a demographics question so we can see who our education is reaching. Great. And then this one is just about the incentives. So I'll go ahead and launch that. Great. Thank you, everybody, for participating in these polls. We really appreciate it. And it just helps us keep our programming going and make sure that we are building the solar community. All right. With that, we'll get right into it. We'll go into our main presentation, and we'll start by looking at how solar works. So this diagram shows a typical home solar system. You can see that the house is in the middle of the diagram. Sunlight is striking the solar panel. Labeled here as photovoltaic panels. They're also sometimes called PV, and it produces voltage of electricity. This is a special type of electricity called DC electricity, which is different from AC electricity, which is used by the lights and appliances in your home. This is why we have another special device called an inverter or microinverter that converts the electricity produced by your panel into the AC form that is used in your home. From the inverter or microinverter, the electricity flows into your electrical panel, or also known as your breaker box, and into all the circuits in your home. There it can power your lights and appliances or charge any electric vehicles you may have. If your solar system is producing more electricity than you're using at any given moment, the excess energy flows out of your home and onto the electrical grid. There it can be used by other homes and businesses at moments when you need more electricity than your solar is producing. You can still produce that energy or purchase that energy from the grid. So this is called a grid-tied solar system. So very different from like if you're off-grid. When you go solar, you get to use a special utility meter that measures the flow of electricity in both directions. This allows you to use a system called net metering, which gives you credits for the electricity you export to the grid. That's all there is to solar, and it's pretty simple. This is one of the reasons why solar is so low maintenance, and it really does work in Oregon. So we'll kind of go over each of the components individually. First, starting with inverters. So the component that converts, like we said, the DC electricity to the AC are inverters or microinverters. The white box on the image on the left is an inverter. It accepts the electricity from all of your solar panels and converts it all at once. The inverter on the right is showing multiple microinverters. And the difference there is that the inverter will accept, like I said, all that electricity at once, but the microinverters are connected to one or two panels. And so with that, if you don't have a lot of space available, like say next to your breaker box to install the inverter, you might have to install it further away. So just any time that you have to put a system component further from the rest of the components, you will have to put in more conduit. And that's just an important factor when you're thinking about cost. Both inverters and microinverters are great options and are installed frequently. It just depends on what your needs of your system are. So your contractor might suggest one over the other based on what you're looking for your system. Solar panels can be mounted either on your roof or as a ground mount. Roof-mounted systems account for a vast majority of the solar installed, especially in dense urban areas, because there's not a lot of ground space available. Ground-mounted systems can be a great option for families with more space. However, because they still need to be wired to your home's electrical panel, ground mounts installed far from the home can increase the total cost of your system. Solar roof tiles are another technology that we get asked about. These solar roof tiles are sometimes called solar roof shingles, is a roofing product that both protects your home from the elements like a roof and generates electricity like solar panels. So multiple brands of solar tiles exist, but most solar installation companies do not install them. So if you're interested in exploring this product, you'll just need to seek out a company that specializes in them. This technology is significantly more expensive than regular solar panels. So it's just recommended that you find an experienced contractor who has done a project like this before. Make sure that you ask your contractor how many of these systems they've installed, and also see if you can speak to one of their previous customers to see how the experience was for them. Although many projections have been made about the decrease in this solar tiles or solar shingles, the industry has not progressed as quickly as some have promised. So if you are looking for solar tiles, we caution that waiting for the price improvements may leave you waiting longer than you expect. So just something to keep in mind. All right, as we mentioned earlier, your solar system is producing excess electricity. It gets exported to the grid and there can be utilized by other utility customers. Net metering is the process that allows you to account for the energy you export so that you can gain credits for it. This is why it's important to have a home solar system that matches your electricity consumption and needs. Let's illustrate how both work by walking through two examples. First, a typical sunny month, and then second, a typical cloudy winter month. The graph on the left shows what's happening in the summer month. The orange bar shows how much electricity you're producing with your solar panels, and the blue bar shows how much you've produced or how much you've used with your lights and appliances and outlets. Because you've produced more than you've consumed, this month you are exporting electricity. The green arrow shows the difference. And then that graph on the right is showing a typical winter month. So you can see that the amount of electricity you're producing is less as it's cloudy. And the blue bar shows you what you've consumed. So in both of these examples, you're consuming about the same amount, but you're getting different amounts from your panels based on how much solar resource that your panels are able to access. So that red arrow on the right just shows the amount of electricity that you'll need to purchase from the grid. So with net metering, the credits you earn during the sunny summer months offset the electricity you purchase in the cloudy winter months. So it is important to note that the year for net metering starts on April 1st. So while your credit rolls over month to month, it does not roll over year to year. So any credits you haven't used by March 31st will expire. That's another reason why it's great when you meet with your contractor to review what your energy consumption is, because you want to match that consumption as closely as you can so that you are not left with unused credits. All right, here is a monthly electricity bill example, and we'll walk through this example from a PGE customer. In the box on the left, you can see the period for which you're being billed, the reading of your bidirectional meter at the beginning of the month, and the reading at the end. Thanks to your new bidirectional meter, the electricity you import from the grid is recorded separately from that which you export. So you can see in this example, the total electricity coming into your home this month was negative 327 kilowatt hours. And this basically means you exported more than you earned. And so you have gained 327 kilowatt hours of credit that you can use at a later time. Because you were a net exporter this month, oh, my slides have run away with me. So because you're a net exporter this month, your billable kilowatt hours is 0. So we'll take a look at your bill for like the other side of the bill. So we looked at like, okay, when you started, when it was red, what you consumed versus what you used. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to notice that it's surprising that you actually don't have a $0 bill. That's because your utility connection comes with an $11 base charge. And so all utility consumers pay this amount to the grid. So you can see that $11 base charge, and then you also see some other taxes and fees that total to about $1.63. So even if you do have solar, you will not have a $0 energy bill if you are connected to the grid. But compared to the average Oregon utility bill, which is about $70, that's a pretty big savings. So this example shows you just how much you can save month to month. And then in Oregon, we do have pretty cheap electricity due to the hydroelectric dams. However, it is important to remember that electricity prices will still increase, and that estimated increase per year is about 2%. So system size. Solar is highly modular, and it also they vary widely in size and for different reasons. So system size is measured in a unit called kilowatt, and the average residential size in Oregon is about 8 kilowatts. So what determines your system size? By far, the biggest constraint is how much electricity you consume. So this is because, as mentioned earlier, net metering credits do not roll over from year to year. That means that to get to the most value of installing that solar system, your contractor will design it to meet but not exceed your estimated annual consumption. Your contractor will ask you for your past electrical bills to determine your future needs. If you are expecting to install appliances or make life changes that will significantly increase or decrease your expected consumption, make sure that you let your contractor know. Other factors can also limit your solar system size, such as available roof space, budget, limitations placed on the residential house based on HOA, condo association, or historic district. Note that in Oregon, it is illegal for HOAs to tell you you cannot go solar. However, they can impose restrictions on how you go solar, including, for example, preventing installation on the street side facing the home. So if that does happen, you do have the legal right to petition your HOA to waive restrictions that you believe to be infringing upon your right to go solar. So those are just some of the considerations to take when you are thinking about going solar. So that's just an overview of how solar works and the basic components. We're going to now jump into aspects of your home that can make it difficult to go solar. So first one we're going to look at is solar access. So regardless of your location in the state, the orientation of your roof has a big impact on your solar access. This diagram shows a home and its orientation with respect to the cardinal directions. The arcs over the home shows the path of the sun in the summer and in the winter. Regardless of the season, the sun will always be in the southern sky. So this means that south-facing roofs are ideal for solar. However, both west-facing and east-facing roofs can work great. In cloudier parts of the states, roof facing due east can also be slightly less effective. That's due to persistent clouds in the morning that will block that early sunlight. So the only roof panes that consistently do not get installed on are going to be the north, northwest, and northeast facing. Another thing to consider is going to be shade. So even if you have a perfect like south-facing roof that is situated great to get that solar access, shade from objects like trees and buildings can prevent from receiving enough of that solar resource. So however, it can be hard to self-assess. So if you do have shade, it's going to be best to have that solar contractor come out and assess it for you. They'll either use a special measuring device or satellite-based software to see if you can access enough of that solar resource. Right, then we'll look at roof complexity. So the complexity of your roof can also impact your ability to go solar. Solar systems can split into several sections, span multiple roof planes. However, the ideal roof would allow for a single continuous installation of one roof plane. The image on the left shows a roof with a complex roof geometry. Although there may be many parts of that roof that are south-facing, most are too small to install the panels, and any system your contractor could fit would be broken up into multiple system arrays. So the image on the right shows a roof with a great continuous area to install that solar. Even though it's a smaller size roof, having that continuous area is going to be a lot more beneficial. All right. One of the biggest factors in considering going solar is going to be the condition of your roof. So your roof will need to be replaced when it reaches the end of its lifetime. And when you do that, you'll need to pay a solar contractor to uninstall and then reinstall your system. This service can cost $10,000 and up, so it's very important to plan ahead. For this reason, we strongly recommend that you have 20 plus years of roof life when you install solar. Different types of roof have different lifespans. So for example, metal roofs typically have a much longer lifespan than asphalt shingle roofs. So however you decide, it's just really important to consider that total lifespan of your roof. And if you're expecting to re-roof in the next few years, you should wait until that time to install the solar so that you get that full life of the roof. And then roof structure. So what's underneath your roof can also impact your ability to go solar. In order to get building permits for your installation, your contractor will have to get inside your attic to check the structure of your roof. Note that some jurisdictions are pickier than others. So in general, Portland has much stricter requirements than all other parts of the state. Newer homes tend to have trusses, which are pictured on the left, and have basically, it's like additional vertical and horizontal support beams that support the rafters of your roof. And then older homes tend to lack these support beams, as shown in the attic on the right. So in case your home has, trusses or rafters, regardless of which one it has, your contractor will have to get in there and assess if it meets the requirements. Based on calculations and estimates of if there needs to be any engineering or structural reinforcement added, and it depends on your jurisdiction as well. Engineering costs could be an additional $2,000 to $3,000, and then additional reinforcement could range from $3,000 to $10,000. So just an important thing to consider when you are thinking about going solar. And then the National Engineering Code will also impact this decision as well. So if you have a home that's pre-1950s in Portland, especially with the urban craftsman style house, you may need to have additional reinforcements added. All right, and then now let's look into this topic of storage, which is becoming an increasingly more popular part of solar and storage, and something that more and more homeowners are looking to add. So it is important to know that your system by itself doesn't allow you to use solar electricity during a power outage. To do this, you have to add a battery. So this ability to use power when the grid is down is called energy resilience. Solar and battery storage are complementary technologies. So solar makes batteries more effective by recharging it, and your battery allows you to access your solar independently from the grid. Here's a look at a house that has solar plus storage. So you can see the solar panels installed on the roof, and then they also have their battery installed in the garage. So power outages vary for their causes, frequency and duration. Frequent short outages might be caused by a storm or a squirrel. In some areas, slightly longer outages in the summer months can be caused by a red flag weather condition where there's a high fire danger. And at these times, utilities may perform what is called a public safety power shutoff. And so that is where they intentionally will turn off a whole section of the grid if they think the power line infrastructure could pose an unacceptable fire risk. So the first event of this kind in Oregon happened in 2020, and these events are expected to increase with the increase in fire danger. Then in the Pacific Northwest, we also face a unique risk of a large earthquake, the Cascadia earthquake. So when this event occurs, it is thought that the power may be lost in the Willamette Valley for up to 6 weeks. On the coast, the power may not be restored for several months. So it's just important that you know what type of outage you are expecting to endure so that your contractor can design a system that meets those needs. So note that solar plus storage technology typically can provide power for a short to medium length outage, but it can be prohibitively expensive or infeasible to prep for an extended outage event. So now we'll look at how you pick a battery. So when it comes to picking a battery, there are many good products on the market. However, due to manufacturer certification requirements, many contractors specialize in one brand. So for this reason, if you want to compare different battery technologies, you may need to compare quotes from multiple contractors, which we highly recommend. You cannot mix and match battery brands, though some battery manufacturers have different battery sizes or modules that can be combined. So most batteries have a 9 and 14 kilowatt hour of capacity. Some manufacturers make units typically smaller units that are typically around 3 to 4 kilowatt hours, and some make supersize units that are about 20. So the majority of these batteries on the market intended for homes that are attached to the grid are either nickel, manganese, cobalt, which is like a lower price, or the lithium iron phosphate, which has a longer life and is more commonly used. For standard household electrical loads, the lights and appliances, many batteries will perform well. So if you're intending to use a battery to back up that load, you just have to consider that when you are picking a battery and working with your contractor. If you are intending to use a battery to back up a load that requires a lot of instantaneous power, like a motor, your contractor will need to factor that in as well. So it's very important to set your expectations properly about what a battery can do and what a battery cannot do. So even if you don't use much electricity, a single battery will almost never back up your entire home for a meaningful period of time. However, you can do what's called a partial home backup. So in this scenario, certain circuits of your home will receive power from the battery, but the rest of your home will lose power during an outage. So if you're able and willing to front the extra cost, multiple batteries can allow you to achieve a whole home backup, but this process again is prohibitively expensive for most consumers, but it is a simpler and more efficient process overall. So we'll dig a little deeper into the partial home backup. So when you get a partial home backup, the way you divide your home into sections that are backed up and sections that are not is based on the breakers in your electrical panel. When you've selected which circuits you'd like to receive power, your contractor will remove those breakers and then place them in a newly installed smaller essential loads panel. This second electrical panel will be wired to the battery. The battery system sizing process will entail a detailed conversation with your contractor, balancing your desire for functionality and your budget. So a great way to think of this process is the trade-off between two questions. First, what needs battery and battery power, or what needs power? And second, how long does it need that power? So items most frequently chosen to be backed up are items like a refrigerator, so the food doesn't spoil, lights in the common use area, and a couple of outlets that can be used to charge a laptop or cell phone. If you're interested in installing a battery, when you install it can affect both the system design and the price. So put generally, there are two options. You install solar and battery at the same time, or you add the battery to an existing solar system. Um, why can the timing of the battery installation affect the design of your solar system? Well, each system is designed in a custom way to best fit your needs. So the components that are selected when you design your system are based on those needs. And this minimizes the cost to you and allows for immense flexibility of solar and solar installation. However, this flexibility during the initial design means that adding new components afterwards, like a battery, may require more parts and labor than if you had incorporated them in the beginning of the design. So as we discussed, there are two types of electricity, DC and AC. Batteries just like solar panels use DC, which your home uses AC power. So when your battery is part of the initial system design, your contractor can select an inverter that serves for both of these components. But if you add the battery to a pre-existing system, you will likely need an additional inverter. So there are other inefficiencies that can be introduced when you add the battery later, including space constraints for mounting equipment near the electrical panel, additional or longer conduit runs, and more labor. So to top it off, the Oregon Solar and Storage Battery incentive, which is one of the incentives we'll discuss later, is only available if you install solar plus storage at the same time. So just for these reasons, installing a battery after the fact can cost up to $10,000 or more than if you incorporate it into the original system design. Be aware that battery storage can require a significant amount of space. This picture shown here is a pretty large system, so not all systems will need this much space. Battery systems are ideally installed adjacent to your electrical panel, which is typically in the garage. So if insufficient space is available for some or all of the equipment, an exterior wall can also be used. However, this comes with additional conduit, which increases cost and in some cases can be aesthetically unappealing. So by National Electric Code, also good to know that batteries cannot be installed in crawl spaces, cupboards, or similarly confined spaces. So it will have to be in an easily accessible space. Now we'll jump into incentives and then walk through a couple example budgets. There are two main incentives available for homeowners going solar in Oregon. First is the investment tax credit, ITC, also called residential energy tax credit, and the Energy Trust of Oregon Standard Solar Incentive is the second one. So we'll jump into both of those. The ITC is a dollar for dollar tax credit, meaning that you can reduce the taxes you owe by 30% of the cost of your solar or battery storage installation. And this is an incentive that you don't receive immediately. So you must apply for it when you file for your taxes. So another thing to know is if you don't owe enough for your taxes that year, you can also claim this credit over the course of several years. The other incentive from the Energy Trust of Oregon is a flat $400 to $500 incentive for every PGE or Pacific Power customer who's installing solar. So this is an incentive that you can receive immediately and which your installer applies for upon your behalf. So importantly, in order to receive this credit, you must also have your system installed by a Energy Trust Trade Ally contractor. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the workshop. So if your utility is not PGE or Pacific Power, you will not qualify for any Energy Trust of Oregon incentives, but you may receive additional incentives from your utility company. So the availability of these incentives vary, and you should check with your provider. We'll go over the investment tax credit in a little bit more detail. So disclaimer, Solar Oregon is not a tax professional, and the information we're about to tell you for this is for educational purposes only. Do not interpret anything you hear today as official tax advice. That being said, there are a few things to know about the ITC. The ITC covers the cost of both solar and battery storage. It applies to the traditional solar panels as well as solar tiles. And the incentive is straightforward, easy to claim, and has helped countless homeowners, business owners attain solar since 2006. However, be aware that you are ultimately responsible for making sure you claim the credit correctly. Myths and misconceptions do exist about this and what it exactly covers. The most common is that roofing costs can be claimed, which is false. So if you are claiming the credit on your own and you have questions about what expenses qualify, you should seek guidance from a qualified tax professional and don't believe everything that you read online. So just a little bit more about this credit. It is claimed on IRS Form 5695 and also Section 3 of IRS Form 1040. Beyond ITC and the Energy Trust Standard Incentive, there are two incentives available to income qualifying homeowners. One is the Energy Trust of Oregon Solar Within Reach incentive. So Solar Within Reach is a $1 per watt incentive that allows Pacific Power and PGE customers to reduce their installations and the installation costs by up to $6,000. Income threshold for qualification is relatively generous. For example, a household of 4 qualifies for the Solar Within Reach incentive if their total income is less than $112,860. So in the chat, there's a link to that Solar Within Reach page so that you can see what the cutoffs are and check out the Energy Trust website. The second income-based incentive is the Oregon Solar Plus Storage rebate. And so this provides up to $5,000 for solar and up to an additional $2,000.5 for battery storage if that's installed at the same time. So again, for this one, you only get the rebate for the storage if you are installing your solar plus storage at the same time. So that's important to remember. And then just to recap why costs may vary. And we'll do that before we jump into example budgets. So the cost of solar depends on size of the system, re-roofing if needed, structural analysis, structural reinforcement if needed. And then for batteries, the costs vary as we discussed if you're installing solar and storage at the same time versus installing the storage after. If installation of the electric panel or other components have to be spread out and they can't be installed next to each other, as adding an essential loads panel, if you're doing that partial home backup, or if you are using multiple batteries. So in addition, the availability of incentives can also impact the cost of solar and storage. So for these reasons, it's important to quote the price of solar. It's impossible to quote the price of solar without knowing your site. And so just keep this in mind when we jump into the example budgets. The first budget we're going to look at just shows if you were installing solar only. So, and it's estimating the average size of that solar system at 8 kilowatt. And so here you can see that the first columns list out the possible costs and incentives to consider if you're installing just solar. And then you can see on column 2 through the last column, it shows you those incentives and costs based on what customer you are. So first one is if you're a Pacific Power customer, second is if you are PGE, and then the last two show Pacific Power and PGE if you are income qualifying and can gain access to some of the additional rebates. So we'll kind of jump right into that. The cost before the incentives, you can see, is the same across the board. And then it looks at, who would qualify for the Energy Trust incentive and how much you would get off for that. If you are income qualifying, you can get a larger amount for that Energy Trust incentive. And then it looks at the state rebate. So the state rebate, you can see if you're income qualifying, it does have a greater impact on the cost. And then the out-of-pocket cost does not include the federal tax credit because you can't get that right away. You have to apply for it when you do your taxes. So you can see the out-of-pocket costs for the Pacific Power PGE customer, as well as the Pacific Power and PGE customer who are income qualifying. And so you can see it's a bit different if you can access all those incentives. And then once you apply for your taxes and you can apply for that federal tax credit or the ITC, you can see that you also get that 30% as well, which can greatly take down the costs. And for example, the first one, gaining access to all those incentives, you were able to decrease your costs by 10 grand. And then looking at PGE, if you're income qualified, you were able to reduce your costs by almost half. So that is just really good to consider when you're looking into solar and storage, and you want to make sure that you know what your incentives are and that you can access them to their full potential. So we'll jump into another budget example, and this one is showing solar plus storage. So again, you can see we're going to do another 8 kilowatt solar system, but we're going to have 10 kilowatt hours of storage as well, and we're installing these at the same time. So if you look across for Pacific Power, PGE, and then our income qualifying customers, you can see the examples of the cost and what incentives they can access. The cost is greater than getting just solar. So you can see that cost before incentives is about 10 grand more than if you were just getting solar. And then as you go down, you can see your out-of-pocket costs after you get the incentives. And then at the very end, once you apply for that federal tax credit. So again, you're still getting quite a lot if you can access those incentives. The last sample budget that we're going to review today is looking at if we got solar and storage, but we didn't do them at the same time. So you added your solar system, your 8 kilowatt solar, and then you decided to add a battery later, the same size battery that we saw for the solar and storage budget example. And you can see that adding it later, the cost of the battery right off the bat is a lot more expensive. You're still looking at trying to access, the incentives, and then you can see some incentives you can't access because, so that state rebate, you can't access because you didn't do solar and storage at the same time. So that's another thing to consider. And then if you look at the final cost after you've done your federal tax credit, you can see that the cost to do solar and then add storage after the solar is added can be quite significant in the overall cost. So if you really want to add solar to your system, it is something to look for and plan for in the beginning if you can. You could still add it later, but just know that your costs might be a little elevated for adding that storage system after you have already installed solar. And then because solar and battery storage can be a large upfront cost, some homeowners will utilize financing. So some homeowners can obtain the loan through a bank, which they already have a relationship with, but some banks don't provide loan products tailored to solar. So your contractor may partner with a credit union or a third-party broker that offers a package that is geared towards solar. And these types of loans may allow you to refinance when you claim your ITC, which can minimize the amount of interest you owe. But just note that the interest payments on your loan do not qualify for the tax credit. As with any major financial decision, make sure you carefully assess your financing options. And then how do we get started? So we watched this presentation, we want to go solar. What are the next steps? So we'll look at those. So besides offering incentives for solar, Energy Trust of Oregon has a certification program for contractors to help ensure a high quality of workmanship. Energy contractors who can offer you the Energy Trust of Oregon solar incentives must be part of the trade allies of Energy Trust. So in order to access those, you need to use a trade ally contractor. And we highly recommend working with them as they have been vetted and can help guide you as you make your installation decisions. So how to request a quote. There's a really great tool on the Energy Trust of Oregon's website. It's the solar bid tool, and you can use it to request quotes from contractors. And basically, you put in your information on what area you live in, and the online form only takes about 3 to 5 minutes to complete. And it'll be a great way for you to connect with companies that are trade allies and then can help best serve your solar needs. And the link for that is also in the chat. So once you've got your quote, selected your contractor and signed a contract, here's what you can expect in the installation process. Your contractor will handle all permitting, apply for the Energy Trust of Oregon state incentives on your behalf, and design your system. So although your system design can be quick, some jurisdictions have been experiencing permitting delays for all types of construction projects since the pandemic. So these delays can be longer in Portland. For this reason, you can expect that installation may happen between 2 to 12 months after you sign your contract. However, once it's time to break ground, installation is very quick, and most residential systems are installed within 1 or 2 days, making it pretty painless for the installation. So after the system is installed, your contractor will manage your permit inspections, coordinate the installation of your new bi-directional meter, and schedule your interconnection with the utility. And this can take about 2 to 3 weeks. So after you've been interconnected, your system will be producing clean, renewable power from the sunlight falling on your property. And so that is very exciting. That is all we have for the presentation. We do have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So I will go ahead and jump right into that. I do see some questions in the chat, and just a reminder, if you do want to add a question, you can click on the Q&A box shown here and add your question, and then I'll just jump right into those. All right. So let's see, it looks like some might not have received the links in the chat, so I'll go ahead and resend those once we send out our thank you at the end of this presentation. And this presentation will also be recorded and added to our YouTube later so that you can access it. And also just try reposting those in the chat. Let's just see, because that actually might pop in now. So hopefully you can see the links in the chat now. But again, we'll just resend those if you have not received them. All right, so first question, we live in an HOA and want to put panels up on shared common half roof. How can we access incentives? So, and the best way to see what incentives you can access would be using that solar bid tool in on Energy Trust website, which hopefully you can see that link in the chat now. And that'll help you connect with some contractors in your area who are also trade allies. And they can help guide you through that process on if you can install on a shared roof and what that would look like. All right. Can you put solar panels on a pole barn? So as far as I've heard, as long as the roof can support the solar panels, so when we looked at that trusses versus rafters slide, basically just making sure that your roof has the structural integrity that can support the solar panels, then it should be fine. Also, the location of that pole barn is going to impact how solar will work in that location. And the contractors can help assess that because they also can measure, you know, if you're getting enough solar resource for that roof of that pole barn and if it meets the structural codes that are required to install those solar panels. All right, my roof has about 15 years of life remaining. What about installing batteries before installing solar? The good question. So just due to the highly customizable nature of installing solar and storage, it is recommended if you can to just do them at the same time, because then you'll be working with a contractor who's thinking that whole design of that system and how it all works together, which will help you get the most efficient system possible. So you probably could just install a battery, but you'd get the most efficient system if you install them both at the same time. All right, has the price of batteries come down much over the last year? It has come down, but I can't say if it's come down a lot in this last year, but overall. So when the technology first came out, it was really new. Not a lot of people were accessing storage for their solar. And so now that batteries are out, more homeowners have installed storage. There's more efficient batteries on the market, which can be more cost effective. And then there are also more storage incentives available. So that's going to also help with that cost of batteries. All right. And then again, this presentation, you can review it again. It'll be on our YouTube channel. Let's see, a few other questions. Okay, so is the federal 30% rebate still available for the cost of storage if you don't install it with the panels? So I believe you can still apply it. Your solar contractor will know for sure, as well as a tax professional. They'll be able to help assess if that is still applicable because your tax professional knows exactly what expenses you can apply to it. All right. Can you only get the state of Oregon incentives if you contract with the state approved list of contractors? So the Energy Trust Trade Ally contractors, you have to go through them to get the Energy Trust incentives. So some of the state and the federal don't require Energy Trust trade contractors, trade allies, but we do recommend that you go through the trade allies, one, because they're vetted, but two, then you also have access to more incentives. Are the state incentives available for Tesla? So Tesla batteries, I do think that there isn't like a restriction on those, but just to be sure, you'll want to check with your uh, tax specialist because they'll know for sure what's the most up-to-date um, requirements for that federal tax rebate so that you just don't want to be in a situation where you think something's covered. So you always want to just confirm with that tax professional before you go forward. So that way, when you are ready to claim it on your taxes, you know you've done due diligence. Because there's a lot of information out there and not all of it is correct. So definitely refer to your tax professional for that. Are there ideal angles for south-facing roofs for most energy efficient and economical installation? So south-facing roofs that get a lot of sunlight and aren't shaded and aren't complex are going to be your best option if you have that. And that would be the most efficient. If you have a very steep roof, that can impact how much solar resource you're able to access. And basically your contractor can measure that once they get out to your site. So they can use a handheld device that basically has like a fisheye lens that can look at how much solar resource you can access, or they can use their online system, which basically has access to satellite data, and it can see what your solar resource is there. So the best way to check that is going to have to have that assessment done, have someone actually come out to your site or assess your site with that satellite data. Okay. Will a pole barn qualify for ITC or not? So again, that's another good question. The tax incentives and taxes change so frequently, so it's just really good to check with a qualified tax professional. How does net metering work with solar plus storage if you are enrolled in the PGE time of day program? So that is a newer program that I am not actually familiar with. So I guess my question would be, are you actually connected to net metering and are you getting that on your bill? So if you are using a net metered system, a solar plus storage system, or just solar that's connected to the grid, you should see it on your bill that you can see the amount of energy you're consuming. First, the amount of energy you are creating, and then you should be able to see those on-bill credits. So I would say take a look at your bill and start there and see what you're finding on that. Are the batteries changing and improving so quickly that it'd be good to wait if you already have solar? So that is up to you. I do think that the technology is changing pretty quickly. Solar installers are also learning, how these components work because the technology is changing so quickly. So if you have solar already, but you're thinking about adding storage, it's going to come down to what are your needs right now, and are you trying to like handle an outage? What are you looking to get out of that solar plus storage? Because yeah, I think the the technologies are quickly changing, but I think that we're going to see that for a while. So it really comes back to what your needs are and assessing that. And if you want to have, that battery that you can use if there is an outage. Let's see, just a few more questions. What are the expiration dates for these incentives? So that varies depending on the incentive and how much funding was allocated or approved for that. In our legislature, there are people who are working to try to extend incentives, add different incentives. So they do change rather frequently. And so it's just good to, if you're hoping to get in on one of the incentives, that you act sooner rather than later, just because we don't know what the state of them will be in the future. So With any incentives or rebates, it's definitely something you're going to want to consider in your planning for your solar plus storage for your home or business, and really think about when you want to go solar by and if that specific incentive you're looking to access will still be available. All right. Let's see, last question. Okay. Approximate the cost of added house insurance for solar panels and battery, and what percentage of the total cost of solar. So for any insurance and how that covers your house and solar panels, it's going to depend on who your insurance provider is. So that is going to be who you're going to want to go directly to, just because there is so many variations on insurance providers and what the coverage or even the plan that you have is. So that'd be a good place to start. I'll just stay on for a little bit longer just in case any other questions do come into the Q&A. But thank you everybody for joining today. And we hope that you will join us at another one of our events in the future. To check out what events are coming up, you can see Solar Oregon's Eventbrite or check us out on solaroregon.org.